Occasionally, people ask questions on how to fix morphs on their clothing, and so I thought I'd just cover one method that we can use, which is using the smoothing modifier. Now, you may be aware or familiar with the smoothing modifier. You find it under Edit, Figure, Geometry, and Apply Smoothing Modifier. And what that does is it basically smooths out the geometry and it does collision detection. So if your clothing is looking bad, you can go in and turn on the smoothing modifier, and it will try to fix up your issues, and it'll fix poke-through issues that are there in many cases. So let's go ahead and dial up a morph on the figure here. I'm going to go with XO body because it's angular and should introduce some issues. And you can see things become kind of lumpy. And if I go ahead and select the Persian full top here and go to Edit, Figure, Geometry, Apply Smoothing Modifier. Okay, it's smoothing, you can see it down here. It didn't make a big difference. Now the reason it didn't make a big difference is because our default settings are pretty low. At smoothing iteration of 2 and collision iteration of 3, you're really not going to see a huge difference between the morph that you see on the screen that gets projected and once it's smoothed out. It'll fix some poke-through issues though, so it can be a pretty safe number to start with. We don't really recommend relying on the smoothing modifier to fix all of your problems though. And so what I'm going to show here is that the smoothing modifier can be very useful when you want to fix a morph and actually save that out as a morph and load it back in. Alright, so in that sense, let's go ahead and zoom in a little bit here. And you can see things are a little lumpy, and if I up the smoothing iterations to 20, watch it smooth here, 45, 50, 75. There you go. So now everything's smoothed out quite a bit. Now just to give an idea of what the smoothing exactly is doing, there are two smoothing types. The default is base shape matching. Now the way base shape matching works is it says, okay, the base geometry shape does not have any of these lumps, doesn't have any of these issues. And so the more smoothing iterations you set, the closer the clothing goes back to the original state. Which means it tries to go back to the unmorphed state. I have XO as a morph dialed on, but it would try to go back to the base Genesis 2 female shape as much as possible, and then it has the 3 collision iterations, so it would then go and collide with her and push it out. So you'd basically be erasing the effect of the morph that was projected and then relying on collision for everything. So if I go too high in this, like 50, which is going to make me wait, but if I go too high of a smoothing iteration here, it's going to potentially cause poke through, because the way the collision detection works, you might end up with really flat looking beads right here, or the rings or other things like that. If they were colliding with the figure in the morph, then they are going to flatten out a bit, and so it's really not a recommended thing to crank this up too high. Now 50 wasn't high enough to mess up my content, happy day, but really I rarely go above 20 as a value here. But you can see 20 seems to be a good value. It gives me nice smooth results, and is certainly much better than the auto projected morph was looking. Okay, so let's say that I do this projection and I really like how it looks. Well, let's look at those pants really quick. There's a little bit of poke through right here. I'm going to try this one more time with the pants. I'm going to the pants themselves, they have smoothing already on. Okay, I'll hit on to turn it on, and the poke through disappeared. You can see the poke through right here, and when I turn this on, it goes away. That was only with a smoothing iteration of 2. So again, you can use the default setting if you're just trying to deal with poke through. It probably will be good. But if you're trying to fix shape issues that come in from the morphs being lumpy or whatever, then you're probably going to have to crank this value up a little higher. Basically, play with it, see what happens. Now those pants look a lot smoother now. If I turn off smoothing, you can see how you get all this weird detail in here. The exomorph makes ridges on the figure, and you don't want those in the pants. So the smoothing is super handy for fixing up these morphs. Okay, so let's say that you have applied smoothing and you're really happy with the result. We can't rely on the end user to have smoothing to fix up morph problems, especially because if they use it in Poser, we don't have the smoothing modifier working in Poser. So you would actually need to bake this out to a morph. I've got the Persian top selected, or the Persian pants selected. I'll do the Persian top, and I've got this exomorph on. So how you would do this, you'd actually select the figure, go to the morph that you have dialed up, click on the parameter settings, go in here and just copy the name, cancel that, alright, and then go to the Persian top, and we're going to turn off all other geometry. And the Persian top, let's just check its mesh resolution. Okay, it's not a sub-D mesh. Go to mesh smoothing, and we like how it's looking right now, but if I go and export this out to OBJ to create a morph for this, it's not going to export out this smooth version. I have to turn on interactive update. So let's turn that on, and you might have to wait a second sometimes. In this case, no. So that's great. It's ready to go. Now if I export this out to OBJ, I'm going to paste that name that I copied from the morph, save that, and then I want to export out to DAZ Studio scale, and hit accept. Okay, now that that is complete, then I can go ahead and load that morph back on. And you can do that simply by clicking on Morph Loader Pro. There's an icon over here if you're using city limits. It's under Edit, Figure, Morph Loader Pro. So with the item selected, go to Morph Loader Pro, and it's got this nice dialog here, which is nice and handy. We don't need those settings. We just want DAZ Studio as the scale. We want to choose the morph file. It is FBM exo, and the morph is already projected on the clothing. So if I just load it default like this, it should complain at me. Yeah, it says, oh, there's already a morph that exists. Cancel that. That was bad. Alright. Let's try this again. FBM exo. You want to go down here to override existing. Right click on there and say deltas only. Now if the name collides, it's just going to update the morph so it looks right. And the other options don't matter because the morph already exists, so it's not going to change the grouping of the morph that already exists. It's great just to leave this all default. Hit accept. And it should tell me that it was all good. Okay, created morph successfully. And now I can actually turn off smoothing. And as I dial up the morph, you can see I get that smoothed version that I got when I had the smoothing turned on. So that is how you would bake out those smooth morphs. And again, it doesn't really matter what value you set your smoothing iterations to. I mean, what you want to do is go for the best result. 20, 40, 60, 1,000, I don't know. You just need to try your numbers. I wouldn't go too high too quick. But you figure out your number, you use it, and then you're going to bake it out to a morph, and so it's not going to be that important. The end user is not going to say, oh, it took so long to use this clothing, because you're not going to have the smoothing modifier set to that high number that you're using to get your morph. So that's how you load in your morph fixed. Now I did want to touch on the other smoothing type really quickly, and that I'm gonna dial another morph though real quick. Exo body, we're gonna turn that off, and let's go with hag. Okay, so kind of interesting. It smooths it up, makes it look all pretty, or as pretty as a hag could look. let's say that you turn on smoothing and the base shape matching just, it doesn't work. Sometimes there are cases where it'll explode. It's not a happy thing. I don't know why it does it, but there are cases where clothing will not work with base shape matching. In those cases, what you want to do is you want to change this to generic. What generic does is all it does is it looks at its neighboring points. Each point looks at its neighbors and says, oh, okay, well this point is here, and these other ones are all here. I'm just going to go in the middle of all these. So it kind of smooths things out. Sometimes generic is a much nicer smoothing result than the base shape matching. You just kind of have to play it by ear, see what works best, and then bake out your result at the end. Now, I'm not saying that you can't have smoothing on your clothing when you ship it. What I'm saying is while you're creating your content, you want to get it to work as well as possible without smoothing. Because we can't guarantee that people will be using smoothing all the time, and also some machines are slower and they really bog down with this. But I do like to have smoothing on clothing often because people can do really crazy combinations of morphs and bending that can break things. So maybe your clothing poses just great when it has one morph, like muscular, applied, and it's in a pose. But then if you have muscular and the pose, and then you go and dial exo and heavy and all these other morphs on top of that, it's really hard to make morphs work on clothing so well that it can handle being compounded on top of 4 or 5 other morphs plus throwing bending on top of that. So in those crazy situations, smoothing usually can fix things up, and so it is nice to have on your clothing. It makes it so it does work a little better in DAZ Studio than Poser, but that's probably okay because there's no way that you as a content creator can go and make your morphs work in every single combination that a user might do. So there's my pitch, I guess. When you're working on your clothing, don't use the smoothing as a crutch, but once your stuff is done and it works well within the parameters that you've set for yourself, probably one morph at a time, some bending and everything, then you can also throw smoothing on if you like, and the default setting of 2 is fast enough that it shouldn't slow down anybody's machine too much, but they'll still get the benefit of having that to fix poke through and other things like that. There you go. That's how you use smoothing.